The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So hello everyone and welcome back to the Aviation Week Network series of air transport webinars. Delighted you could join us today. Today I am joined again by my colleague Jens Flottau, the Air Transport Director for Aviation Week and Space Technology. And we have a very, very special guest today. We're joined by Sir Tim Clark, President of Emirates Airline, and of course, if I may say so, Sir Tim, something of an industry legend. So we're absolutely delighted to have you join us today. We've got a very good audience, a very expert audience with a lot of questions. So we do have a lot of questions to field for you today. So in the interest of using our time best, may I ask you to just sort of set the scene a little? You know, obviously extraordinary times for everybody. Can you just give us a little status of sort of, you know, where the priorities have been for you these last few weeks, and where you stand now as you start to, you know, look to the to where we're going. So may I hand over to you, and then we'll go into questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the intro. Hello, everybody who's tuned into this. I'm sitting in Dubai at the moment. It's just gone 6 o'clock in the evening. Let's just take you back to perhaps January of this year, when, like so many other carriers in the world, we were all doing quite well. Emirates was heading for one of its best years. The profitability had improved, the gross income had improved, balance sheet had improved, lots of cash, unfortunately, on the balance sheet. And we were heading for a closing on March 31st of a very good year. And there were others in the same situation, although in the years prior to that, there had been many casualties in our business, but then they were nothing to do with COVID, of course. Then the virus reared its head. For us, it started to become apparent in January because a lot of our production is in Asia, in the East, and we could start seeing a little bit of dare I say, flakiness in the demand in some of our routes, which got progressively worse during February, so much so that we had to start taking down some of our frequencies to quite low levels. And that, of course, worsened during the course of March as the virus progressed westwards. And so many countries then went into some kind of lockdown. Effectively, that brought us to a halt. The United Arab Emirates, where of course many people know Dubai is based, where Emirates is based in Dubai, closed its borders on the 25th of March, which effectively meant that we had to stop operating, which for an airline that had 259 passenger wide bodies operating, to go from a robust operation to a hard stop was incredibly difficult. We've never been in that kind of situation, apart from, well, we've had the ash clouds, we had 9/11, we had the financial crisis, but a hard stop, no, nothing like this had ever happened before. So, you know, there was, dare I say, a degree of bewilderment when that happened, but we had already started to map what we might be doing if this did happen in mid-March. And we realized that if this virus was really going to be as bad as it has become, that and as air carriers were putting back their capacity, so there was a depletion not only in passenger seats but in cargo. And it was cargo that we saw there was an opportunity. And of course, with our fleet of 777-300ERs, which are enormously capable aircraft, we were then able to adapt those to cargo operations. So much so that we got cracking with that fairly quickly. So by the first week in April, we had about 15 of those flying with the 777 freighters. And as of last week, there were 85 passenger ERs flying, plus 11 LRFs flying. So we had 96 aircraft of the 153 777s in total operating. Now, they're not going to produce the kind of income that we get from passenger operations, but nevertheless, they certainly kept the wolf from the door. And that's what we've been doing, and it's been hugely successful. And as we all know, the world knows, there everybody was caught short with regard to how they were going to deal with the pandemic, primarily in the healthcare area. So the demand for PPE, pharmaceuticals, etc., simply became an exponential growth overnight. And the more we put in, the more they wanted. And so these freighters were, these passenger aircraft and the freighters were flying all over the world, not just into the UAE. They were flying from China into the US, from China into Oceania, and other sources of production of these kind of things. So far, this is where we are at the moment. Going forward, we see a progressive relaxation of lockdown. These are domestic measures which have a bearing eventually on what we can do on the airline world. This isn't just about Emirates, it's about everybody else in the industry. But it's a pretty sorry tale, I have to say. And in that time, we've seen the industry having to resort to something that they always never wanted to do: bailouts from governments. And they have had to do this simply because they would have gone out of business had they not been bailed out. That is the harsh reality of it. This is such a capital-intensive business with such high levels of fixed costs that the notion that you can stop your income coming in to support those fixed costs is anathema to everybody's thinking. So what happened has happened. The criticality of getting the business up and running to get the cash flows back to where they need to be, to service the fixed costs and also get the operation back in some kind of good shape is absolutely essential. This is the imperative for all of us in the business at the moment. And however hard people try, there's a mixed response to that kind of request. So at the moment, when I look out and I see the Europeans opening up in a rather cherry-picking manner, in the sense that some countries will allow some countries to come in and other countries will let them in, but they are limited. And I see other countries are going to open during the course of the next 2 months, but they are introducing high levels of conditionality for entry. And on top of that, we've got a multiplicity of thought with regard to the protocols of passengers traveling, the actual seating on aircraft, what goes on in airports. That varies by country, and however hard the international entities and institutions to do with civil aviation are trying to focus the minds of the multiple countries on the planet to act as one, that's proving incredibly difficult. Everybody's got a different view as to how it is. And much of that is determined by how badly they were affected. Individually as countries, and how other countries view those countries that were badly affected if they really want the citizens of those countries to come to their country, and so on. This mathematical R factor that they talk about. So we are still looking at a high level of uncertainty out there in the next few months. As far as Emirates is concerned, the government will be opening up the airport for transit operations for passengers, more than just the fairly limited ones. We will then start to put passengers on those passenger ER freighters, because obviously they've got the seats. We'll just put cabin crew and catering on, and hopefully start some kind of meaningful flow across a network which is predetermined by the cargo operation. It's early days, but at least it gets something going for us. And then I think I've said fairly publicly, I'm not overly optimistic about the rest of this year. There are still, for instance, restrictions by government on their citizens. For instance, the United Kingdom still has a travel advisory from the Foreign Commonwealth Office to say don't travel by air. Well, of course, that's and others have got the same kind of thing. The requirements for quarantine are still there in most countries. The question of who can come into those countries, generally only nationals at the moment. If you look at New Zealand, it's closed to everybody. The Australians will only allow Australians in, and so on and so forth. So eventually this will change. Now, if I can then say, how is it going to change? What everybody says is the new norm, which is something I'm struggling with anyway. But I think there are two strands of thought here. There is the strand of thought that is driven by the need and the imperative and the belief that we'll get the vaccine. and we'll get the antiviral therapeutic drugs to deal with the infection if the vaccine is not 100% efficacious. In other words, if you get it, you will be treated with these antiviral drugs, which will save you perhaps going to the worst stage of the disease. Everybody will be inoculated, I would like to think. There will be a global inoculation program, which will kick in the first part of next year, which sees fair and equitable handout I say handout, I mean, obviously there'll be commercial opportunity, but everybody, irrespective of who they are and where they are, should get the chance of getting a vaccine. It'd be like polio and smallpox and all the other bits and pieces. Once we get to that stage, it dispenses with the need, in my view, to do all the protocols, social distancing and everything else, because you have an inoculated population. We will still be conditioned by the trauma of what we went through. Social distancing, staying at home, actually talking to people for once, actually enjoying your family, catching up on a few things, etc. And I think mankind and society, there are great societal benefits as to what has happened. But if this vaccine kicks in and we do get a, dare I say, a cure or a panacea to this problem, then life will go back very rapidly to normal. I don't subscribe to the view that it's all going to change. I don't subscribe to the view that there is going to be a new world order or something like that. I'm really sorry to disagree with people about that. I know what we are, and I know how we reacted to some of the big traumas in the last 10 or 15 years, whether it be 9/11, whether it be the Gulf Wars here, whether it be the ash cloud, whether all these kind of things. The resilience of mankind, its aspirations are quite incredible, and I can see many benefits, not a new way, but many benefits from what we have all experienced and what we're doing now, and the accelerant of the need to continue to communicate. One thing we've all had to do in the last 30 years is communicate. We live on communication. We thrive on it. The notion that we should come out of the workplace and go home and not be able to communicate, well, then you get mental health issues big time. So the fact is that these video platforms have mushroomed, and they will continue to do so, and they'll become much better. So we have incredible resilience in the systems, incredible fidelity, etc. So people will be able to communicate. People say to me, well, of course, this means that's the end of business travel, or that's the end of this and that. And I look back, and I remember in the mid-90s when the age of information really hit us, and the internet finally took off, and the digital world drove so much and continues to do that. And we're still on the early stages of this technology that drives what we're all doing. And people would say to me, well, of course, that's it. Nobody's going to travel because they don't have to do this. Nobody's going to do that. Well, if you remember, from the mid-90s onwards, the rate of growth of demand for passenger air by air grew. It's probably about nearly 200% higher now. My maths may be slightly over the top. I may be gilding the lily a little bit, but certainly air travel absolutely went through the roof, particularly with low cost, particularly with entities like Emirates and others who saw the immediate need of the people on the planet to travel. And as a result of technology, as a result of improving the way we went around our business, as a result of the ability for entities like hoteliers to communicate on a B2C basis with their passengers and not having to go through intermediaries and middlemen, but it was like the Big Bang of 1987. Suddenly, everything became available. Now, to my point earlier about the vaccination, that will continue beyond the vaccination period. So we will see a restart. I would hope that people are measured and concerned about environmental footprints. I think this is incredibly important for all of us. Here am I sitting as an airline manager saying we should be concerned about environmental footprint. Of course we should. And it's not just about flying by air or traveling by, it's about how we live our lives. And there is a big lesson that we could have all learned in the time we've been here. But going forward, that's what I see. The other strand, of course, is the vaccine doesn't appear. And that there is no real solution to the pandemic, and the virus always lives with us and others come down the track of us. And therefore, this is where you get a new set of living conditions, because then you will get the permanence of social distancing, the permanence of, and how that works through the hospitality business, the leisure business, the travel business, and everything else. So that is a real worry, because at the moment, everybody is going down that path because there is no vaccine. The certainty is that if you didn't get a vaccine, you have to go down these paths. And I struggle with airports, what they're going to look like under these regimes. Airlines flying half-empty aircraft because of social distancing, which makes absolutely no sense. And of course, it's a complete disaster from an environmental point of view. You can't fly half-empty airplanes around, burning all that fuel. That's nonsense.
So it sounds like you're, you're very cautious about, what can be achieved this year. But for the industry, it's going to be a very tough situation through the end of the year. But it sounds like you're reasonably optimistic, maybe more optimistic than most, in terms of the ultimate recovery, and that, as you say, we're not just all going to be living like we will get through this, on the provision, of course, that we get that vaccine. Can I just ask you, we've got a lot of audience questions, so I do want to make sure that we leave plenty of time of those, and there's a lot of questions surrounding your fleet plans and the sorts of things I'm sure that you're expecting, so we want to get some time on that. But when you talked about the freighter side, the freighter cargo operations that you've been doing, and as you say, you really had to sort of turn that around very quickly and do that. What were the main constraints, obstacles, etc., to get that going? What were the biggest issues for the operations and the pilots doing those cargo operations?
Actually, it's a good question, because we had the flight deck, we had the aircraft. Unfortunately, we had opted for the aft cargo door to be a large door, so we were able to put 14 pallets, full pallets below decks. The pilots, we then operated to a new set of flight time limitations. So we were able to operate the freighters to places like London and Amsterdam and Hong Kong and bring them straight back again, because we augmented the crew, put them into rest in the passenger seats or the crew rest, turned it around, came back again. So it was a highly efficient operation. The adaptability, we've always had a fairly versatile freighter operation. We're for hire and reward, and we do have scheduled operation, but we do a lot of bespoke work. So the notion that we should then turn the ERs to bespoke work as well as scheduled operation was quite easy for us. Most of the airports that we fly to are already on our network, so don't need special Civil Aviation Authority dispensation from the UAE. And as passenger demand, we were allowed to put passengers on, so we just put the crew on for those. So actually, it was quite easy to do. The pilots were particularly keen to fly. Obviously, pilots always want to fly aeroplanes, so there was never a problem with that. They worked pretty hard for us. There were some issues with regard to how we took them off the aeroplane in Dubai, because they then had to go into quarantine. So we tended to cycle the same crew, so they didn't actually come into the community, and that was all worked very well with the Department of Health here and everything else. So actually, it worked quite well, and it still does, I have to say.
Excellent. Jens, can I hand over to you, because I know you've got a
certain. Sure. And the audience has a lot on the same subject that I was going to ask, which is affecting your fleet plans. The big element in the room, as far as fleet is concerned, is the A380. A lot of people want to know, will you return the fleet at the same size, or will you operate fewer of them in the future? And then, are any of the orders at risk now that you need less aircraft, at least in the short term? The 777X, the 78, and the 350 order.
Okay, well, obviously, when you look forward and you look at the two strands of schools of thought, if you take the left-hand strand, which was vaccine, then you will map an operation, which in my view, because I'm a bit of an optimist, of all things I've said, that in the summer of 21, you're ramping up operations fairly rapidly. Now, you may not get to 100%. and it'll be tempered by all the bits and pieces, countries and how they. But let's assume that this vaccine is rolled out and everybody's quite happy with it. Why would they then prevent you from going there? So it is the business of the airlines then to market their wares and get the thing going. I believe that can be done. And if you extrapolate that simply on a linear basis, it suggests that by 22, at the latest, by the summer of 22, you've got all the aircraft flying. In answer to the question, that means we have 116 380s flying, and we have scheduled out 9 or 10 777-300ERs. They're coming to the end of their lease life, and they will more than likely be returned. So the fleet is being, through attrition, coming down anyway. As you know, I'm a great believer in the qualities of the 380. And when the fuel is at $30 to $40, it's a very economical, or rather, it's a good cash producer and good for the bottom line, providing you can fill it. And we don't have social distancing rules. So again, keep your mind on the left-hand strand, which is vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. Now, as I said, if we don't get the vaccine, or we don't get the vaccine in the time, it's going to condition everything we do, not just Emirates, but all the big carriers, whether it be Lufthansa, Air France, KLM, IAG, whatever. And we're all going to be faced with this. And in that time, we will have to take a decision over the next, to see how things are going. So over the next few months, there's a lot in the mix. What's the right size for the airline? People say we're going right size. What's the right size? Depends on which school of thought you're in. So you're kind of trying to keep things as constant as they can, but in the end, you know that with this level of fixed costs, you've got to do a bit of sizing. You've got to look at what you actually got in the absence of a robust income coming in. So we're looking at all of this, and therefore we're looking at the 380s. We're looking at the 8 that we have with Airbus. We're looking at the 9X. We're looking at the 350s. We're looking at the 87s. Okay. But to say now this is what we're going to do would be, in my view, inadvisable. We need to see a little bit more time to see how this is all going to work out, pan out. And if I am right on the left-hand strand, then I think global demand will pick up once we've got over the traumas of the disease itself, and things will get going. If not, we have to see. So if you start hearing in the next few months the vaccine has not been found, or it's going to be not as good, or they've really got a problem, and now it's 2 years out, then the right hand starts to kick in. And that's going to affect not just Emirates and what we do with our fleet, but everybody else. At the moment, we plan to retain all the 380s, albeit they're all sitting on the ground. But in fairness to the engineers, they are taking them apart inside, sterilizing, cleaning them, doing whatever they need to do. They're on a monthly maintenance schedule, which means they're flown every month. So every single one of the aircraft are flown to keep them current. Pilots are kept current on recency and also do some of the flying of these aircraft. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the sizing of the airline will depend on that. And we will attend to all the issues in play as we get more clarity. It's the best I can say at the moment. So long as at the moment the UAE is closed. Even the country we're in is closed. So it's very difficult to say, right, we're going to do this, 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 this. India is closed. Pakistan is closed, although they're letting some out. Bangladesh is closed. So Sri Lanka doesn't open until the middle of August, and so it goes on, to the point I was saying earlier. So yeah, there are things out there that we have to address. I will admit that. There are discussions that we need to have, hopefully in a grown-up manner. And as we deal with the frightful situation I mean, we're lucky in the sense we have got the freighters active. A lot of other carriers don't get that opportunity, and they're really struggling. And unfortunately, if this goes on, I'm digressing from the question you asked, yes, but if it carries on, all the bailouts that everybody's received was a question of the now. So everybody has not the income, and therefore bailouts, but if you leave it for another 3 or 5 months, they're going to need another set of bailouts because those leases aren't going to go away unless they get.
Is this a situation where you could potentially be looking at narrow bodies?
I think in the fullness of time, and these are the people who come after me, of course, there are a number of very good aeroplanes out there. We know that, great tools in the toolbox going forward. The question is, the airline community has so indebted itself in the last few months. So, and that debt has come on balance sheets in a number of different ways. But in the end, you are taking on a huge amount of debt. Now, you either have to repay it. Very few of it is, if part of it is in grant form, so straight cash into those companies, forget about it. Others have equity requirements, have loans, etc. I guess the point I'm making is that the boards of these carriers, the management of these carriers, are looking at a pretty shot balance sheet. They're looking at ways and means to try and get cash back onto the balance sheet. They need to try and get their fleet going as quickly as possible, hoping that the fuel will stay where it is, the airfares will remain in the degree of sanity, so we don't get some insanity there, and therefore they can start doing that. But that is going to take time. Negative cash flow is going to be a fact of life for a bit of time to come, and nobody can say how that's going to pan out. So the notion that you would then consider buying new airplanes, such as wide bodies or narrow bodies, at this stage, however beautiful they are in fuel burn, environmental, in all the other bits and pieces, I would suggest at this point in time is an anathema to the general think. And as a result of that, you see people like the head of Boeing and the head of Airbus both saying, I think the head of Boeing said it won't be back until 2025 in terms of pre-COVID levels, and Airbus has said 23, 24 or something. So between the two of them, you've got 4 or 5 years of pretty tough going, where airlines are really struggling to downsize their fleets, get rid of the old aircraft, and get a network running which is giving them robust cash to put them back where they were, and then start repaying the debt, because the debt is not going to go away. And unfortunately, we are in an era of very low interest rates, which makes the burden of debt that much more easy to deal with. Had that been the other way around, goodness knows what would happen. But that's the way I see it. So in answer to the question, narrow body, wide bodies, both sides of the Atlantic, I think they're going to find there's going to be a scarcity of orders over the next year or two.
So according to IATA, governments have given support to airlines to the tune of $123 billion since the outbreak of COVID-19. Have you been surprised by the amount, by the sheer volume of the support? And isn't it an irony from your point that those that have complained the loudest against alleged Gulf carrier subsidies are now receiving a lot of money?
In answer to the first question, no, it doesn't surprise me. I know the scale of operation. I know the size of the fleets and the networks, and I knew that it would only be a question of time, depending on what people had on the balance sheet. So the public listed companies, all you had to do was look at what was on the balance sheet in terms of cash and various instruments that were relatively liquid, and then do the maths as to how long it would take for them to burn that down. And you've heard statements from the head of Lufthansa, €1 million an hour. You've heard the same from Delta, etc. So do the maths. $178 million or euros a week is going out of the company. So it was clear that the states would have to step in with huge amounts of money. Again, that wasn't difficult to get to. As far as subsidies are concerned, it is ironic that the very people who were so beastly to us in the past are now facing the same problem. But we've got to be grown up about this. I'm the last person to want to see airlines go out of business, because I understand the criticality of them to the global economy, irrespective of their commercial or policies, what it may be. It's very important that the industry should not go under. My main concern is that, as I've said earlier, if you don't get the industry up and running, the very carriers who have taken all this money will also face, the governments will have to step in again if they can. And do I feel uncomfortable about it? No, I don't really. It's just the way it is. And others will, I know, are fairly vocal about it because they may not have got the benefit of those subsidies. Well, that's something they'll have to deal with their governments, etc. But goodness me, it's not only in those areas, it's in every other area. It's very, very important. There's this notion of maintaining your productive capacity in any economy and trying to get aggregate demand where you need it to be. If you get those wrong, your economy then goes into a nosedive and you have your double-digit collapses in GDP if you're not careful. It's absolutely critical that you use every trick in the book, fiscal and monetary, to get the economies back onto some kind of footing. Now, the airline and the leisure industry is just part of it. It's not all. And I think, fortunately, there is a realization that those are the kinds of things that have got to happen. Therefore, that is why you see this level of subsidy support going into the airline community.
We're getting quite a few.
Some questions from the audience. Sorry, Karen. And following up on your question, actually, about narrow bodies, there are some questions from the audience. Some people asking whether this will mean closer cooperation, even closer cooperation between Emirates and Flydubai on short-haul missions. And also whether or not there is still room for 3 big carriers in the region in this new world.
Yeah. Well, as far as Flydubai is concerned, the continuation, and it was a continuing what we were doing to work and bring the 2 airlines closer to energize, extract value, increase value, was going on anyway. So we have a disruption, and when that disruption is over, whichever strand you use or thought, the 2 will continue to work together. So I see no reason why that would change. As far as is there room for 3 large carriers? I don't know. Is there room for 3 large carriers in the United States? Plus the JetBlues and the Southwest and everything else. Is there room for Malaysian, Singapore Airlines? Is there room for this? I don't know. To my point about the left-hand strand of thinking, yes, there is. We will go back to where we were. And you have to believe that. And I think the more people that think with this real positivity with regard to how we can get out of this, this is not going to bring mankind to a stop. We're going to deal with it. We're going to go around it, over it, under it, whatever. We will be better for it. Change, opportunity. It happens. You can do better. And everybody's trying to do better. So when this emerges, the 3 carriers in this particular region will already, Etihad has downsized itself to a far more efficient, leaner operation, which allows it to operate far more efficiently and improve its profitability and its cash. I can't speak for our friends in Doha, but in Qatar, but I'm sure they're doing the same kind of thing. So yes, I do. As I said, if you're on the right-hand strand, then it's going to take longer and it's going to be tougher. And I have to tell you, there will be casualties. We're not through this. Even left-hand, right-hand strand, by the end of the year, there are going to be more casualties. People will not, even with the equity injections, with the bailouts, etc., they are still going to be in trouble. So expect some more.
We've had several questions about your view on the leasing market and how this has changed. Is it changing the leasing market for the better or worse?
Well, yes. Look, at the moment, it's looking pretty grim. Why? Because many carriers are trying to, if you take the current situation, hand back aeroplanes that they see no need for. Others have got aircraft that they have on order from lessors and they don't want to take them for obvious reasons. And that's without the MAX situation. So as far as the lessors are concerned, and the debt providers behind the lessors, it's not looking that robust at the moment, as it isn't for the whole industry. They, like the aerospace, they're part of the aerospace industry. They're all facing pretty grim time, which is, I keep repeating, the sooner we can get things back to some kind of normality. But if it continues, you're going to see more casualties in those areas. The lessors are going to face situations where airlines are either on the point of going out of business or having to cut back so much to survive, aircraft get handed back. And the ability of those carriers that have orders that are due to be delivered in this financial year, possibly even next year, I would prepare myself, if I was a lessor, which I'm sure they're doing, to the eventuality of there being a certain amount of weakness in the demand and therefore the streams. And I think that works back into the manufacturers. They've got to take view of that, engine propulsion, as to how this is going to change. So I think it's a bit like buyer beware until we know more about where this is going to go. You've got two scenarios to work to. It's probably prudent in this point in time because of the difficulties that so many carriers are in the absence of state support or access to more debt, which basically kicks the can down the street, that some carriers won't make it. It's a frightful thought, but I think that's what's going to, and that'll affect everybody.
And then we have.
There's been.
So go ahead, Jens.
Sorry, Karen. There's been a few questions about some specific business models here that we've seen emerge over the past few years. One is ultra long haul. I mean, you've been part of that to a great extent. Is that more difficult to resume? And then long haul low cost. What does this crisis mean for that sector of the industry?
Yeah, ultra long haul. Well, of course, I consider Emirates to be one of the real pioneers of this whole aspect of travel and those segments that travel on us. And I remember how we were ridiculed so often when we were involved in the 340-500 and the Boeing 777X. People said no, we will travel. And now, of course, it's de rigueur in so many of the airlines in the world using the 787 and the 350-900. To do all these, and this rather proves the point, if there was a point to be proven. Do I think that segment will still exist? Yeah, sure I do. Yes, I do. I definitely think that people will want to travel in these modern jets, very fuel efficient, environmentally friendly, and they are prepared to travel 14, 15, 16 hours, 17 hours, and quite enjoy it. We do not have any pushback in all the segments that we offer. In excess of 16 hours, whether it be Los Angeles, Houston, Auckland, wherever it may be, people get off and say, that was the best thing we've ever had. And it's so good to be able to connect Sydney to Newcastle in the UK or Hamburg from Adelaide. And it really works. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. People are getting used to it. They want it. Now, long haul low cost, on the other hand, is something that we've been we've been looking at for some time. Much will depend on what the fuel does. Much will depend on the price points of those. Much will depend on what the competition does in reaction to that, because in the lower pricing segments of the 380, it becomes particularly competitive, and they've got to be absolutely sure that the maths are right and the aircraft that they use are right. There have been a few casualties because they haven't got it right, or they've misjudged the demand, or what the competition will do to deal with that particular segment. And don't forget, a 380 with its economy inventory gives us enormous capability, assisted by very sophisticated software, which allows us to optimize the mix to a profitable level using upwards of 200 or 300 fare types on the deck, on the aircraft. So, you know, we don't know. If, on the other hand, global demand in line with GDP growth, say it went up 6, 8, 10%, and of course we know there's a high positive correlation between GDP and demand for air travel. If that happens, then it'll open up volumes, and in those volumes you always got opportunity. If on the other hand, GDP contracts, which is looking like it's going to do, the ability of a player to go, he's got to be a brave person, there may be something to try it, but I'm not sure about that, frankly. You know, as I go back to aggregate demand, GDPs, all the consumer segments, all those things are not looking too good at the moment. So it would be a bold person to say long haul low cost is for me. Good luck. There we are.
We're getting quite a lot of questions related to and you did touch on this in your opening remarks, onto, you know, the new hygiene and distancing rules, etc. We heard today from ICAO, they have announced their guidelines, and they're trying to get a harmonized plan. There were some interesting points in that, including it looks like still trying to keep people 1 meter apart, even on the planes. Do you have any comments about, like I said, we're getting several audience questions about what do you think are the most effective hygiene safety rules, and that can both keep people safe but also be practical. What do you think about the guidelines from ICAO?
Safe and practical, the two almost conflicting points here. Safe, yes. Well, we're all safe anyway, but the fact is, if I take our company as an example, we have rigorous standards of hygiene. We've always had those, but for those people who have traveled on our 380s, we have 2 cabin service attendants whose job it is to look after wonderful showers, but also regularly service and clean the toilets. I've always had a problem with cabin crew who are basically food handlers having to do laboratory servicing as well. So there's always a bit of a difficulty there. And on the current operation, we have deployed these CSAs on them. At the same time, we're giving people a box in which they have gloves, they have masks, not just one, a lot of them. They have hygiene sachets so they can clean their seat area. Very important that they see what you've done. They might smell disinfectant in the air or whatever. They'll see that the toilets have been sanitized and sterilized regularly by individuals who are dedicated to doing that. And at the same time, we give them the tools to wipe their screens, to wipe the armrests, to keep their area as clean as best they can. It gives them a feeling of well-being, and that's not difficult to do, and the guys in the operations group have been really working hard on that. The girls themselves are in PPE, they have visors, but they are still able to conduct a meaningful service. So actually it works quite well. And in Dubai Airport, they have, since we've closed so many terminals, they've been through the, I probably use about sort of 4 or 5 tons of disinfectant, cleaning every surface. Everything that could be cleaned has been cleaned time and time again. The check-in protocols, etc., are all socially distanced. So yes, in answer to how you hold out that you can do that as an airline, it's important that we are showing people that if you travel on us or anybody else who is doing this, that's what you're going to be getting. So don't worry about it, and don't forget the air is circulated every 2 minutes. Every 2 minutes, the 380 air and the 777 is circulated, purified, sterilized. It goes through filters which eliminate 98% of anything, including our friend the COVID-19 virus, gets caught in the filters. They're that good. And we're getting fresh air being brought in all the time. And the air goes from the ceiling to the floor. It doesn't blow across the cabin or down the cabin. So it's brought down and sucked out through at floor level. So there isn't a lateral spread, so to speak, of that. Now, that's what we do. What ICAO and IATA may agree is fine. The uniformity of and harmonization of the conditions and protocols needs to be a global initiative accepted by all countries. The problem is it is not. Okay, you have different schools of thought in medical science, life science, epidemiology, whatever it may be, who take different views as to what should be done. Now you talk about 1 meter apart. 1 meter apart on an aeroplane, does that mean 1 square meter? Because To have your seat next to you empty is okay, but if the person behind you sneezes and they have the bug, the sneeze will go 20 feet down the cabin, or coughs, or whatever. So you then would have to have the seat behind you free, which is why we have worked a number of situations where if we do this meter apart, then you basically got 50% of your economy inventory. Fortunately for us, I'm not saying for everybody else, our business class cabins and our first class cabins already fall into that category. So we don't have to do anything there. It's on the economy deck. And frankly, it makes no sense at all. It'll kill the business at the time. For all the reasons I've said, the industry is in trouble. It needs all the help it can get. If you do this, then you're going to have a problem. Secondly, if you do that, to compensate, you have to raise the airfares. Okay, it's pointless thinking that if you're a low-cost carrier, you can continue to charge whatever it is to go from, Madrid to Hamburg for some low amount of money if you exclude the taxes. That's all going to change. You can't afford to do that. We've spent the last 30 years as an industry making ourselves, and I speak for everybody, making ourselves hugely efficient so that we can absorb incredibly low fare levels in real terms given to what they were 10 or 15, 20 years ago, getting the utilization of the aircraft really high, maximizing the efficiency of crews and everything else. So we are a just-in-time entity. Everything is compressed to try and extract the margins to get the profit and the cash in place. If you unravel that, because now when you get to the airports, you've got to do much more time cleaning the airplane. You need disinfecting crews, you need new protocols. So the turn doesn't become, in the case of low cost, 30 minutes or 20 minutes, it becomes an hour and 10, unraveling the business model. And of course, then you've got the situation, how does it work in airports? If you were going to socially distance in airports, at the moment it works because there's very few people there. But as the demand grows, you're going to find compression in check-in, back further, curbside check-in, inability of cars to get to the airports because there's a queue because they're only allowing a certain number into the airport. And they then have to go through, whether they've done online check-in, if a bag drops, a central search. We all go through central search. And invariably, we all would say, central search should have 50 people on instead of the 5 that you're faced with. And that slows the whole thing down. And the biggest contaminant in this whole process of the passenger journey, I have to tell you, is central search. That's where you are more likely to pick up anything there. And then you've got the passenger boarding process. Then you've got the question of if you're in the premium cabins, the lounges, how do you space all that? So it becomes almost unmanageable. And importantly, it becomes very difficult for people, unless they really have to travel, it puts them off. So you've got to somehow find a way that you can do all of this. Technology will help you. And I don't mean temperature checks. Technology can help you to do all this. And the faster we move in things like central search, I've also been in my bonnet about the ability of machines that we have using artificial intelligence to detect what the regular passenger, you and me, they know who you are, they know what you generally carry, they know where you're going, and they just let you through because they're looking at you and they're looking at what's in your handbag or your wheelie bag, but generally it's the same stuff. So we need to accelerate all of that. And this, if anything, does push airports into looking at all of this. But in the short term, to your point, ICAO, IATA, and how they are trying to persuade governments to do the right thing in harmony, it's very difficult to say that you fly into Italy, and Italy have just said domestic operations has to be socially distanced. So Alitalia, I suppose, I don't know if it's still operating, but they will have to socially distance. You'll get some countries, well, if you're going to that country, which requires you to be socially distant, and another country that doesn't, if your aircraft arrives and you've got a mixture of requirements, you've got a kind of a rather difficult situation to try and manage all the various country requirements. Of course, Emirates carries on any 380, you've got sort of 200 nationalities, 150 nationalities. So that's quite difficult to do. So We have to find a way. And the trouble is, there's a lot of talking. We need to walk the talk, get it done, because the longer you leave it, the more difficult it becomes for the airline community and everybody involved in it to get back to business. Because you say, yeah, we really do want them to fly, we want hospitality, we want our hotels and restaurants to work. But if you put draconian, onerous limitations of what they can do, they won't do it because they can't, because it's no longer profitable. So.
We're getting also several questions on the MRO side. Your thoughts on MRO support for the existing fleet, and are you postponing any heavy checks? Can you just talk a little to the MRO side, please?
Well, on the as far as Emirates is concerned, obviously we don't have the hours, the cycles that we would have planned. There are some aircraft that we have deactivated and put them into long-term storage. So the checks that might have been due on those, by virtue of the fact that we've made statements to the regulator that we will not fly those for the time being, we put them into park. They will eventually come back, but at this point in time, that won't happen. Now, of course, the whole industry, the OEMs, and the supply chain and the MROs all faced with a rather glum situation. The aircraft, with 90% of the aircraft in the world not flying, there is very little business, and they are in that same sort of genre of business and industries aligned to what goes on. All I would say is, like, grandma cycling is, attend to the cash, attend to your supply chain, take whatever painful decisions you have to take, make the assessment of where you think you are likely to be in a very, very difficult situation, and scenario map, worst case, best case, and then make a decision. In my view, if you were to downsize and you were to make, and using the word redundant, but if you were to lay off resources, human capital, whatever it may be, as soon as things start picking up, you can get them back very rapidly because they've got nowhere else to go, as far as the human resource is concerned. Secondly, what you were paying for in the past, because there is a high degree of surplus capacity and possibly inventory, you'll be able to get in at a lower price. So if you can get yourself into a position where you are in a degree of limbo, where you can keep the wolf from the door, and you have taken those rather unpleasant measures with regard to, in this case, staff, on the basis that the moment you'll bring them back, and I believe they will come back to you very rapidly, because, as I said, there's little or nothing to do, unless you're in information technology or something where there's always scope for business. But in the MROs, it's a tough time. It is tough for everybody, and it's not just the MROs. It could be the airline catering industry. It could be anything associated with what the airline industry does. That this is particularly difficult time. Those that had the cash, have access to debt, have access to other sources of finance, that's good. If they're in a very strong conglomerate which can look after the parent companies, great. It's the smaller ones that are problematical, and not just in the MRO, but in the aircraft manufacturing side of things, where you've got smaller entities which are incredibly important to the process, which may not survive unless the parent or the principal looks after the cash flow of the smaller ones. But the principal's in trouble themselves. They've got their own cash flow issues. So it's a really difficult situation. There we are.
So I have one question, which is about you, Tim, personally. You were going to retire, actually this month, more or less, if I recall correctly. That was announced last year. But obviously, it seems you are committed to steering Emirates through this crisis. Is that, are you going to stay on until you see that the recovery is actually happening and the worst is over?
Well, look, Jens, it's a question I'm often asked, and my answer to it is that when I had agreed with the ownership here that I would retire, that I would work in an advisory capacity. And the basis for that was that I felt that we have some people in the business who are capable of taking over the running of the business without me being around. Admittedly, this is an incredibly difficult time. It's challenging for people like me who have been in this business since, you know, the Wright brothers, whatever. But I actually believe that they are capable of making the right decisions and taking the right action to take the business on, irrespective of whether I'm here or not. Yeah, we've got differences of opinion as to, you know, how the business should be run, and it's very difficult for anybody to say this is it, because none of us really know. But does that need me to be around all the time? No. Does it need, if the ownership wants to talk to me about things and want my opinion, or they want some advice, or they perhaps a little bit more than that, I'm quite happy to do it. I was never going to be far away from the business. What I didn't want was to keep parachuting in. That's the worst possible thing you can do. So I've always said to them, I'm here for you. I will help you as best I can. I will continue to maintain a residence in Dubai, and I'll be coming backwards and forwards anyway. So I'll never be far away.
That's good to hear that you're not going to be too far away, Tim. Another couple of people have asked, has this situation changed your viewpoints on the global alliances? Do you feel that, you know, through all of this, being part of a global alliance is an advantage?
Well, I've never been a fan of global alliances, and I've been on the record for that for 20, 30 years. I'm not altogether sure just how successful they really are. But others will say, of course they are, yes, yes, yes. Well, anyway, we'll see. Will there be a place for the alliances, and will there be further consolidation in the business? There's not a lot left to consolidate, quite honestly. You know, and if you are going to consolidate, what are you consolidating with? Well, there's smaller carriers on the brink of bankruptcy anyway. And I think that some of the great alliances out there, and I don't just mean the commercial alliance, I'm talking about the equity alliances, have been particularly challenging for the businesses. It hasn't been a smooth M&A at all. And there are still difficulties, and those difficulties have taken political overtones. And I'm not going to go into specifics, but I think probably you know what I'm talking about. And the ability, and you know, people like us have always charted our own destiny, done our own thing, rightly or wrongly. We've made mistakes, but we wanted to do it without being hamstrung by others who perhaps don't think as we do. Well, I know they don't think as we do, but there we are. That's the way it is. So and if you look around over the last 10 or 15 years, I've always said that the permanence of alliance has always been questionable in terms of the structures. And I always used to say there will be an awful lot of divorces, there will be fallouts, etc. And that's exactly what has happened. You've seen people swapping alliances, going here, going there, dropping out, switching allegiances. And on top of that, you've also got partners in alliances making bilateral deals with partners on the opposite side. So you think, well, what's all this about? And where is the harmony that you get, and there's the scale economies that you're meant to be getting out of it, where in the end, the world has changed so much since the 80s and the early 90s when alliances came through. The low cost has come through in a very big way. The technology of reach, B2C, through all the platforms that we have. Do we really want to be hamstrung by somebody else who's a bit behind in the application of technology, doesn't think about the digital world or whatever? I don't know. You really want to be able to make your own way. And I've always said, if you can't make your own way, well, don't bother. It's as simple as that for me. And, you know, that's what you have to do. Get yourself, understand your market, understand the segmentation within that market. It's become hugely complex over the years because it has grown so quickly. To my point I said earlier about mid-90s, how the world exploded. It wasn't just a question of first business and economy. It was the segments within those that came in such huge that we needed all the best brains in software to come up with coding that will give you the algorithms to be able to deal with all of this. Now, I really don't want to share all that with somebody else because I'm not sure that the value that I get from them, or we get from them, will be the same as they get from us if they have sight of what we're doing. So the kind of arrangement that we have with Qantas is a really good one. And that's not an alliance. It's not because they're in one world. We're not affiliated, and yet it works very well because it was bilaterally, from a commercial and marketing point of view, and from the P&L for both companies, a very strong bond. Well, you know, if they'd been in one world, if there'd been no one world, we probably would have still done it. It makes a difference. So, and I can give you many, many other examples of where there's been a alliance transactions, bilateral arrangements. So, you know, those that are happy with it, okay. I would like to think that Emirates would get access to the US points. It would be nice to be able to say, with all this water under the bridge with regard to who did what and, you know, who got money and whatever, it makes far more sense for Emirates to have dealt with one of the big three and delivered huge amounts of business to those big three, whichever one was selected, one or all of them, working with us on a commercial basis, because we are the single largest producer in terms of available ton kilometers, seat kilometers coming out of the east, spread into the United States in this part of the world. I'm not talking about Europe. And the notion that you would throw the toys out of the cot and turn that all off makes no sense to me. But there we are. As I said, I bear no grudge. That's up to them. But it would be a tap you turned on and you sat back and watched us fill large numbers of their aeroplanes on the smaller operations that we have to currently arrange access to, low cost or whatever it may be, for those on a B2C basis, or they'll make their own arrangements. So there's a huge opportunity there of unleashing an enormous amount of commercial potential that Emirates could bring to the United States without going into an alliance. It's mutually beneficial.
And that's a fascinating idea, I think, to end this discussion on. Thank you very much. You've been very, very generous with your time, and thank you for, again, providing that time and for all your insights, and all the best to everybody, to you personally, but to everybody at Emirates as you continue this journey. You should be able to see on your screen some of the upcoming webinars that we have in the series. I'd like to particularly point out that in the air transport webinars, we will next week on Thursday, June the 11th, we will be having a fireside chat with the Air Canada CEO, Kaylin Ravanesco. So please do join us for that, but you can see the other ones as well there. So please join us for as many as you are able. Thank you very much from the Aviation Week Network Group. Thank you, Jens. Sir Tim, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.